Hey, what's up guys? Today we're going to talk about Jinhsi, the newest 5-star resonator in Wuthering Waves. Jinhsi is a Spectral main DPS broad blade user who has huge instances of burst damage and is a character who I'm going to help you guys build and play efficiently. In this video we're going to cover everything you need to know about Jinhsi, giving you her best echoes, stats, weapons, teams, rotations, and also explaining what she does and including a showcase. Before we begin, I want you guys to know that I do stream most nights on Twitch. Link in the description if you're interested. Let me know if you enjoy this type of content and want me to keep covering Wuthering Waves. And with all that out of the way, let's now talk about Jinhsi. Alright, so starting things off, let's talk about what Jinhsi actually does, and then talk about why she's so good and how to play her efficiently. Well, first of all, it's worth mentioning that her kit does seem quite complicated. There's a lot of depth to it, but it can be simplified relatively easily, and so that's what I'm going to try to do. First of all, let's talk about her resonance skill. This is an ability that has a few different forms, with the first base one being pretty straightforward. It's a dash that deals spectral damage. With that in mind, that's not how you should be using your skill, as you can actually get access to a much better skill called Resonance Skill Overflowing Radiance that will deal spectral damage and send Jinhsi into her special incarnation state. The way to get this skill is by either doing 4 basic attacks, and then you'll notice your skill will glow, you'll get your special skill and you'll enter incarnation, or by using your intro skill, which is typically going to be optimal, where you get concerto energy on another character, swap into your Jinhsi, triggering her intro skill, and then getting access to your special resonance skill, which you can use and enter incarnation. After you do that, Jinhsi will start to float in the air, being able to deal damage from mid-air and be in an airborne state. All of her attacks and skills can be cast this way, and it does make for more unique gameplay, which I find fun, but also making it a bit more difficult to get used to and dodge efficiently. As you enter incarnation, you will immediately have another skill, Crescent Divinity, which you can use right away. All of these different skills you're using, as well as your basics that are all listed on your Forte circuit, are all considered resonance skill damage, which is important to understand. After doing 4 basic attacks inside of incarnation, you will unlock your third skill, which is called Illuminous Epiphany. This one will have a big dragon shooting down at enemies and will be a massive nuke of spectral damage. This is your biggest total scaling when you add everything up, dealing a large amount of spectral damage and being a huge source of your overall damage on Jinhsi. She is somewhat of a nuke DPS in that regard because yes, her basics do damage and so does her echo and her resonance liberation, but this powerful instance of damage is nothing to scoff at and a large chunk of her DPS. The way this effectively third skill cast will work is while yes, you unlock it after doing 4 basic attacks inside of your incarnation, it will also deal much more damage based on how many incandescent stacks you have. In fact, when Jinhsi is in your party, all of your other resonators gain eras in unity. What this means is that as all of your other resonators are doing attribute damage, meaning just any damage of any attribute, Jinhsi will gain 1 incandescent stack. Additionally, she will also gain 2 incandescent stacks when resonators in the party deal coordinated attacks. This can be triggered through multiple characters, and we'll go over this in the team section, but characters that can do coordinated attacks include Yanwu, Yinlin, Mortify, and Verena, and as they do joint coordinated attacks alongside your active character, Jinhsi will gain 2 incandescent stacks, with both of these effects being able to be triggered up to once every 3 seconds. With Jinhsi's outro skill, however, this will be changed to once every second to help you gain stacks more rapidly. Now, the maximum amount of incandescent stacks you can get are 50, and your third skill press, the Big Dragon Nuke, will deal much more damage based on how many incarnation stacks you have, as you can see by this additional multiplier on your Forte talent. Now, to make these stacks easier to understand, all you need to know is that every instance of attribute damage will give you 1 incandescent stack up to once per 3 seconds or per second with your outro active. On top of that, if you do a coordinated hit, you will also gain another 2, and so if you do a coordinated attack and it's also attribute damage, which they all are, you will gain up to 3 stacks for your Jinhsi off of just that 1 coordinated attack. Now, if the coordinated attack is spectral, for example with Verena, you may only get 2 if your Jinhsi is already giving you 1 of spectral because there's internal cooldown on how many stacks you can gain from a specific attribute. It's once every 3 or 1 second, again, depending on if you used or didn't use your outro. But to not make things complicated, just know that you'll gain stacks as you do coordinated attacks and also as you just do attribute damage. If you're running a coordinated attacker, think of someone like Yanwu or Yinlin, whenever they'll do a coordinated hit of electro damage, you will gain 3 stacks of incandescence effectively for free, up to once every 3 seconds or 1 second with your outro skill. Additionally, as Jinhsi's attacking, she will passively gain incandescent stacks for herself just by dealing spectro damage. This is the same with her echo, for example Jue, who's constantly dealing damage, and also applies if you swap to another resonator and are doing attribute damage on them. Jinhsi will gain 1 stack from that as well. TLDR, you stack up your skill by just doing damage, and even more so by doing coordinated attacks. Stacking up your incandescence is essential, and I'll give you guys an example rotation rotation coming up shortly, but for now know that you just stack this up passively by attacking and by having a coordinated attacker ideally on your team, although you can play Jinhsi without it, we'll get into that later, and then doing as much damage as possible with your skill's nuke. Lastly, worth noting that after you use your third skill, Illuminous Epiphany, Jinhsi will gain Unison, which allows her to trigger her outro skill, which is her sort of equivalent of Concerto energy, meaning that at the end of your rotation, after using your giant dragon nuke, you can swap to your next character, triggering their intro skill and Jinhsi's outro skill. Moving on, for the rest of her kit, Jinhsi has a solid Resonance Liberation that is another instance of burst spectro damage. Pretty solid, not quite as strong as her skill, but a nice bonus, although it does have a high resonance cost of 150 and a long cooldown of 24 seconds. Outside of that, Jinhsi's intro skill is pretty straightforward, and she also gains spectro damage bonus and an intro skill multiplier on her kit if you unlock these passive skills. Additionally, she also gains attack percent and crit rate as bonus stats that you can unlock once again. Regarding her level priority, be sure to maximize your Forte circuit, as while most of her damage is considered skill damage, the scalings are all on her Forte circuit, so be sure to maximize this as your #1 priority. After this, level your Resonance Liberation, and then after this, you can level your intro skill and your resonance skill at a lesser priority, but still worth leveling, and lastly, your basics. Now, for a quick example rotation, while this will heavily depend on so many things, what I like to prioritize is being able to start my rotation off by using an intro skill. This sets everything up very efficiently, allows you to use your supports first, and not have to do 4 more or less useless basic attacks on Jinhsi to enter her incarnation state. If you have to though, you can, it's no big deal, you can do 4 normals and then press your skill to enter her incarnation state. Ideally, however, you can cycle through your other characters, your supports or sub DPSs, use their abilities, and ideally build up your Concerto energy on one of them before swapping into your Jinhsi, using their outro skill and Jinhsi's intro skill, her Jouet Echo. You can then use your ultimate if you have it available to start your rotation off with some burst damage, and then immediately using her skill to enter incarnation, using her second skill, and then 4 basic attacks, then her third skill cast, which is your nuke damage, and then swapping out of her, triggering her outro and your next character's intro. Afterwards, you can sort of rinse and repeat by cycling through your characters and doing it all over again. Keep in mind that you will be passively gaining stacks for your Jinhsi's skill as you do damage on other characters through coordinated attacks and also through just playing them. It is very important to keep this in mind and maximize the way you are building and playing your team to get the most stacks and therefore the most damage on your Jinhsi's skill press. With that in mind, even if you don't have a coordinated attacker, you can still get a decent amount. It won't be quite as good, but it can still be viable if, for example, you have strong support options but don't have a coordinated attacker available to use in your team, although there is a good free-to-play option, so everyone should be able to build a solid coordinated attacker for their Jinhsi. Because Jinhsi's nuke scales on how many incarnation stacks she has, it is important to use your team and your rotation efficiently. Make sure you're using all your abilities, having good uptime, and triggering your coordinated attacks as often as possible to make sure that when your Jinhsi's skill is ready and you use her dragon nuke, it is doing as much damage as possible by consuming as many incarnation stacks as possible. We'll cover her best teams later in the video to help make this as simple as possible. And keep in mind that throughout your rotation, you can use your ultimate basically whenever you have it. Alright, now moving on, let's talk about how to actually build your Jinhsi, starting with her best echoes. Well, first of all, for the echo sets or Sonata effects that you're looking for, it should be no surprise that the Celestial Light or the Spectro Damage set will be your go-to. The 2-piece will give you 10% Spectro Damage bonus, and then the 5-piece will give you another 30% for 15 seconds after using your intro skill. Since Jinhsi's intro skill is very good and something you should be using at the start of your rotation, or at least trying to get it as fast as possible, this set overall will be your best and will help you maximize your damage, giving you up to 40% Spectro Damage bonus in total and being your best go-to set overall. With that in mind, it is also very viable to mix and match 2 pieces of the Spectro Damage set with either Lingering Tunes for attack or even Moonlit Cloud if you need energy regen. For the most part though, just go for Celestial Light, going for the standard Spectro set on the Spectro character. Now for the active echo you should be using, I highly recommend using the brand new Jouet, who you can unlock after completing the story and who's also very easy to farm because you're guaranteed an echo every 2 runs and you could do the lower difficulty ones, provided it's not too low of a difficulty compared to your level, so you can still claim the echo and you can farm it a lot easier than if you were to do it at max difficulty. Now the reason why this active echo is good, however, is because of its pretty insane effect. First of all, it will deal multiple hits of spectro damage, which is good. Bonus spectro damage is always nice, and it will do this with virtually no cast time. You can just press your echo skill and then do literally anything else. You don't have to swap cancel it, you don't have to go through an animation. It comes out virtually instantly and will just start dealing damage. If that wasn't enough, however, it will also give you a pretty considerable buff called the Blessing of Time. This Blessing of Time will last for 15 seconds, during which you gain 16% resonance skill damage bonus, which is great because Jinhsi's damage primarily comes from her skill, and then on top of just that, it will also, for 15 seconds once your skill hits a target, constantly deals spectral damage once per second. This is really good, not just for the spectral damage it deals, but also when you consider the fact that it can constantly stack up your incandescence, giving you stacks to increase your skill damage through the effective spectral damage over time that you're gaining, and helping you just get spectral stacks effortlessly, even if your Jinhsi isn't constantly attacking, giving you bonus damage and stacks for free. Now, while there is a cooldown between how often you can get stacks of the same attribute, and both Jinhsi and Jue are spectral, this does greatly help for consistency, helping you get fast and easy stacks, on top of just giving you skill damage bonus and a ton of bonus spectral damage, which really does add up. And so I highly recommend farming this new Echo, but if you don't have it, you can use something like the Morning Aches as a placeholder, or even the Mech Abomination if you are running 2B Spectral with 2-piece attack as a fast and quite powerful Echo. Overall though, Jue is definitely the best and what I recommend farming for. Now moving on for the stats you're looking for, here's what I highly recommend. First of all, I believe going 4-3-3-1-1 on your Echoes is the best way to go, and then you will prioritize your most efficient stats. On your 4 costs, you want to go for either crit rate or crit damage, whatever helps balance your ratio the most to get a 1-to-2 crit rate to crit damage ratio. Now keep in mind that in Wuthering Waves, your base crit damage looks to be 150, but this is actually just the multiplier. It's 150%, which if you're someone who plays either Genshin or Star Rail, this would mean you effectively have 50 crit damage. It just looks to be 150. So don't get baited by this. You want a 1-to-2 ratio, kind of subtracting 100 from your crit damage, just trying to make it as balanced as possible. What this means is for your main stats, look for either crit rate or crit damage, whichever one you need more of, depending on your build. For your 3 costs, you are looking for spectral damage bonus primarily, but keep in mind that attack percent as a main stat on one of your 2-3 costs, or even both, but ideally just one, is really not far behind running double spectral. In fact, it's only a few percents behind, and because it's so close, this means that if you have better substats on an attack percent main stat versus a spectral damage one, it's really not a big deal, and you can absolutely run one attack percent piece and one spectral damage bonus piece to help make your farming easier if your substats are better that way. Running double attack percent is viable as well, but will be a bit more noticeably worse and less recommended. For the most part though, running either double spectral damage bonus on your 3 costs or one spectral, one attack are both perfectly viable, with double spectral only being slightly better. For your 1 cost, you obviously want attack, and for your substats or just stats you're looking for on every piece, look for crit rate and crit damage to help increase all of your kit's damage, followed by attack percent and resonance skill damage. Flat attack is okay, and so is resonance liberation damage, but it's less good, more of a bonus. And lastly, energy regeneration is a good stat to have and one that I recommend going for. While you don't need a specific amount of energy regen because a lot of your damage comes from your skill and not just your ultimate, being able to use your ultimate as often as possible is nice and is definitely a good chunk of your damage, but because your ult costs a high amount of resonance energy, you typically will try to use it either whenever you can or maybe every other rotation. So personally, I recommend getting energy regen on your substats wherever you can, trying to get between 25 and 40% to be able to use your ultimate more often. To recap, the main stats you're looking for are crit rate, crit damage, energy regeneration, attack percent, and resonance skill damage bonus, followed by flat attack and the other slightly beneficial substats. Now with that out of the way, let's talk about Jinhsi's best weapons. First of all, Ages of Harvest, her signature weapon, is definitely her best weapon. This broadblade gives you crit rate, attribute damage bonus, and also a ton of skill damage bonus, which is great for Jinhsi's kit overall. The crit rate and generic damage bonus help for all of her kit, and then the tremendous amount of skill damage bonus is really strong for her skill, obviously, which constitutes the majority of her damage, making it a great stat stick for her. It is typically around 15 to 20% better than the next best options, and is a solid stat stick for your Jinhsi. With that in mind, it is not a weapon that you should feel forced to get, as there are solid alternatives. First of all, the other 5 stars, Verdant Summit, Jian's signature, and Lustrous Razor, the standard banner one that you could get from your 5-star selector, or choose to try to go for with your standard pulls, are both solid stat sticks. Jian's weapon is solid because it gives you crit damage and attribute damage, which already make it a strong stat stick. While the heavy attack damage bonus is mostly wasted on Jinhsi because she's not really spamming her heavy attacks, the other stats you're gaining make it a solid stat stick even though it's worse than your signature. Similarly, Lustrous Razor just gives you a lot of attack percent, as well as energy regen and resonance liberation or ult damage bonus, which make it a solid option. The ton of attack and energy regen are very useful, and the resonance liberation damage bonus is a nice bonus, making it a similar stat stick to Verdant Summit, 2 solid 5-star options. Personally, since I have Jian's weapon because I play Jian a lot, I can just use it on my Jinhsi when I'm using her as the main DPS instead, and just balance this weapon around my Broadblade characters, and overall, any of the 5-star options are great, with Ages of Harvest, her signature, being the best if you choose to go for it. Now, outside of just the 5-star options, your next best options will be the Broadblade 41 and the Helios Cleaver. Broadblade Broadblade gives you attack and energy regen, and the Helios Cleaver gives you a ton of attack percent. Both of these options are pretty similar, and the Broadblade 41 is one that you can craft, making it an accessible free-to-play option. Outside of those options, the Autumn Trace is usable, although it is more inconsistent to stack because your enhanced basic attacks are considered skill damage and not basic attack damage, so you can't really stack its effect up too consistently, and the Broadblade of Night is a viable 3-star, but overall, as you can see from the rough weapon ranking I'm putting on screen, a 5-star stat stick is your best option, followed by Broadblade and Helios Cleaver. Additionally, regarding her first resonance, in case you're wondering, it is a pretty strong one that will passively allow her to gain resonance skill damage as she's doing her unique basics and skills. This bonus skill damage will be for your Illuminous Epiphany, also known as the one where your dragon nukes everything, and you will gain up to 80% damage bonus for that hit. It's 20% stacking up to 4 times, and you can do this very easily, so usually it'll just be a free 80% resonance skill damage bonus for your last big nuke hit, which is a big portion of your damage, making this a solid early stopping point if you want to get another copy of Jinhsi, but it definitely isn't needed, as without resonances at S0 or whatever, Jinhsi still nukes very highly and is a very strong DPS. Alright, now moving on, let's talk about Jinhsi's best teams and her best synergies. The first thing you need to know, as we covered in the video, is that Jinhsi is a character who synergizes incredibly well with coordinated attackers. While I'm sure there's going to be new ones in the future that will synergize well with Jinhsi, so if a future coordinated attack user comes out, keep that in mind. For now, here are the characters that synergize the best with her. First of all, Yinlin is a very strong coordinated attack, sub DPS, support, burst damage dealer, whatever you want to call her, was not just good damage from her abilities, both her skill and liberation, but also has a really strong mark through her forte that she can apply to enemies and will constantly fire off a coordinated attack of electro damage as your Jinhsi is on field hitting enemies. This will help you gain incandescent stacks very fast, and Yinlin is definitely a premier coordinated attacker who you can also use as a sort of sub DPS in your rotation. With that in mind, there are other coordinated attackers. In fact, to name all of them, it is Yinlin, Yuanwu, Mortify, and also to a lesser extent Verena in her ultimate. Because of this, you typically want to make sure you're running at least one coordinated attacker with Jinhsi in her optimal teams. The first one, as I mentioned, is Yinlin for the reasons I just explained, but you could also use Yuanwu, and in my opinion, he's a very underrated option that synergizes really well with Jinhsi. While his personal damage and scalings aren't the highest, what he does have going for him is the fact that he requires almost no field time to just press his skill, and then he will constantly have coordinated attacks through his field, firing them as your Jinhsi is on field damaging enemies and helping her stack up efficiently. I even managed to clear some tower floors with a level 1 Yuanwu, literally like no investment in him, so he can be a good option at low investment. He's also a free character that was given away through, I believe, the event page, and he can help you get some stacks for free. Mortify is also another option you can use, and he's a really solid 4-star. The only drawback is that his outro skill is really solid for heavy attack damage amplification, which doesn't really synergize well with Jinhsi at all. For those reasons, I prefer Mortify's synergy with someone like Jian and would use him in that team instead, but if you don't have another coordinated attacker, then Mortify, especially with his 4th resonance, can definitely be a solid choice for Jinhsi as just an off-field sub DPS and coordinated attacker. Overall though, just pair Jinhsi with your best coordinated attacker, and your last slot is flexible, usually a healer. For your healer options, it's mostly Verena or Baiji, with Verena being the best, not just because she provides you with a ton of buffs and healing, but also has a bit of bonus coordinated attacks in her ult. I highly recommend building some energy regen on her to try to get her ult back a bit more often, and outside of that, she's just pretty solid, and so you can build your team accordingly. Outside of just coordinated attackers, you can also run Jinhsi with a strong sub DPS, just another good character, a support character, someone like Havoc Rover who has good damage through their skill and ult and doesn't need to spend much time on field. Because of this, Jinhsi's teams can be a bit more flexible, although I still recommend running a coordinated attacker generally speaking. Also, regarding Tao Chi, I want to mention that she has a good outro skill that will increase your skill damage, and it's especially nice for a big screenshot number, damage per screenshot, just to kind of flex a big number, but for the most part, her kit doesn't synergize well with Jinhsi, and you'd rather have a coordinated attacker. With that in mind, this outro skill is definitely really good for Jinhsi, but other than that, I do recommend running, as I said, a strong coordinated attacker, and then a healer, or a flexible last slot if you don't need a healer in your team. Yinlin, Mortify, or Yuanwu are all solid choices for a coordinated attacker, and Verena is the best healer, but not a mandatory one. Alright, now I'm going to include a quick showcase of my Jinhsi getting a 3-star clear in the Tower of Adversity in the last floor of the middle section. This was against the monkey, and this is a clip taken from my stream because I got it live and I figured it'd be best to just use that one where I managed to 3-star it for the first time. Jinhsi definitely leveled up my account, and my build on her is not the craziest. In fact, I don't even have her signature weapon. I'm just using Jian's that I'm sharing across my Broadblade characters. I am running the Spectral set with Jue as my active echo, and my ratio is 62-53 or 153 if you ignore the extra 100, with pretty low energy regen, but it's okay, still decent stats and performing very well, Still more talents I could level, and obviously no resonances unlocked, no signature weapon, although I am using gens, and overall this will be a good clear. Keep in mind that this won't be a perfect rotation or anything. I was kind of just playing how I normally would, and this was also recorded before I made this guide, so I've also improved by playing her more. And for exact rotation stuff, check out the rotation section earlier. This is just going to be me using her in practice in the Tower of Adversity. Keep in mind also that the Tower's Blessing makes my liberation damage stronger when I use my skill, and my skill stronger when I use my liberation, and so that's why sometimes I was trying to use my skill right before my alt, or vice versa. With that in mind, I hope you enjoyed the guide, and I hope you'll enjoy the showcase. Let's go. I should eat. Okay, 437. I don't know how we got 447, but whatever. 437. Assuming we get like a few good numbers, it's probably fine. Okay. I thought that would parry. Hello? Outro skill? That was like minus 10 seconds. That's good damage. I'm actually not going to go to Arena just because I want to be able to just do as fast rotations as I can, even if they're not fully buffed for a bit. Like, I want to just get an extra E in. Because like my ult, even like this helps me get my ult back, and then ult buffs me with the fucking Abyss Blessing. Yeah, I think this was correct. No ult though. I'm gonna save my ults. I can use it. This should be a big rotation. Where's my E? Oh. Please. Wait, it's winnable. Oh, that doesn't time stop, does it? Fine. I waited for Joy, so we get a buff here. Please crit. I hate you. Oh, I got it! And so yeah, overall I've been pleasantly surprised with Jinhsi. I think she's an incredible and really strong, almost borderline broken unit. Very powerful, very solid main DPS that I think you can go for if you like her or want a solid main DPS option. If you don't want her or don't like her, don't feel forced to get her obviously, but I think she's really good and very satisfying if she's a character you're interested in. Thanks so much for watching. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Excuse the slight delay and the fact that I'm not in my home setup. I'm traveling around trying to get back home and get settled in, but let me know if you like this type of content, if you want more Wuthering Waves videos or guides, and I'll try to be earlier in the next one. Thanks so much for watching, and as always, I'll catch you guys in the next one. Peace.